it was in existence in Shelby County,
Yeah,
and that was
Rumley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so there was yet again.
Rumley was founded plotted in 1837.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got the Randolph freedmen weren't coming into an isolated area.
Right.
There were persons of color around them who had gained their freedom within the past 20-25 years.
Right. And something else that is also the kind of tie that I dearly want to explore in connection with promoting the idea of an inclusive heritage was and you mentioned the Quakers, and one of the Quakers responsible for the influence within that area of Mercer County and the effort to provide some assistance to fugitive slaves escaping as they were coming through the area on their way to Canada were the Quakers. But not only were they assisting the African American or black slaves, they were there assisting the native Indian population as well. So once again, there is a tie between Native Americans and blacks because the Quakers, Waddles, founded what was called the Emblem Institute, and that was an academy or school that was endowed by a Quaker, a wealthy Quaker by the name of Emlyn, I believe, and he endowed that school, and it was a school that was attended by Native Americans or Indians and blacks. So there is that kind of inclusiveness on the part of Waddles to try to, and I believe the intent of the founding of the school by Waddles was one of maybe indoctrination is a little too strong, but assimilation might be a better word. The goal was to assimilate blacks and Indians into the dominant, so-called dominant culture of the European American or white society. So that was in play in terms of trying to teach the skills, teach the industry, teach the manners, teach the culture to former slaves and these Native Americans who were trying to learn what they were being taught were the white man's ways. So that was something else that was worthwhile, I thought, sharing. And another way of looking at this tie that could be created linking blacks and Indians within the area in terms of the formation of an inclusive heritage. You might want to, expand upon that if you care to, or we can move to, another topic along the same line as we were exploring there.
Well, along the lines that we were just discussing, the assimilation of people of color with Native Americans into these white communities, if you will. I'm thinking in terms of the area around a place called Tampico, which is between Longtown, you know, in that Dark County area,
Okay.
in Mercer County area, and there was a another Indian agent along with Colonel Johnston. I believe his name was McPherson,
Okay.
and it was like a McPherson reservation.
Okay.
And we have some family connections from Tampico, who are that Tampico area, who are of the Native American and people of color, I'll say African American mixture, that were, I guess it was, would you call it residue? Because when the Greenville Treaty, you know,
Okay.
and we're talking, what, 1814, 1820 time frame, and the removal of the Native Americans from this area to Indiana and then on into Missouri and eventually into Oklahoma, that all of them weren't moved. All of them, all of the Native Americans weren't removed. There were some who had assimilated themselves in with the person of color community,
Okay.
and it's quite interesting, some of the connections that we're running into of people who are now African Americans who do have some of that Native American ancestry, which is being poo-pooed by some, because they aren't, they're of tribes that aren't associated with the 5 civilized tribes. You know, the Trail of Tears tribes. Hell, it was a Trail of Tears from Ohio before there was a Trail of Tears in the South in the 1830s and the 1840s. They were removing Native Americans in the 18 teens and 1820s from Ohio, and some of them weren't going. They were assimilating with the people of color, the free blacks, and they somehow remained and have been absorbed into the person of color community. Now, I don't have any scientific thing or facts or statistics to bear this out.
It's interesting because you know, and you have a great deal more knowledge than myself in connection with DNA. But it seems as if many people, black and white, want to make a ancestral link with Native Americans. A lot of people say, you know, express that kind of connectivity in saying that, well, my grandmother had high cheekbones, and the rumor has it that you know, she had straight black hair, and so yeah, there's Native Americans in my family tree. And you hear the same thing, not only from blacks, but you hear also from whites who want to have a familial kind of connection with the noble savages, you know. But it seems as if, you can correct me, and it seems as if there isn't a great deal of DNA to substantiate all of the claims that a lot of people make to that kind of ancestral identity with the native population.
Well, in my case now, DNA, you know, the admixture results say that I'm like depending on the testing company, but anywhere from 2 to 3%
Mm-hmm.
Native American
Okay.
DNA. Okay, now when we look at the time frame that autosomal DNA is supposed to cover, it fits, because I'm talking about period from the 1780s up through the early 1800s. This Rachel Reno, this fourth great grandmother, was born in Blue Jackets Town.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't a whole lot of black dudes for her to have been associated with, and her mother is documented in the Draper manuscripts as part of this slave family that came to Kentucky with the LaForce family, and it states a mulatto woman belonging to the LaForce family had 5 children by an Indian. And one of the 5 children was named Candace, who was Rachel's mother. So Rachel's mother was African and Native American. So it's kind of follows that Rachel could have Candace could have become pregnant by a Native American.
Mm-hmm.
and had Rachel.
Well, yours is perhaps a little more unique, because you not only have some DNA trail, but you have a paper trail.
Mm-hmm.
By way of the Draper manuscripts, and by way of additional kinds of family history narratives.
Mm-hmm.
But that's unusual.
And the location is such that it's completely removed from, again, the 5 civilized tribes. The Cherokee, the Choctaw, and the whatever. These are Native American roots right here in good old West Central Ohio, Logan County. And it's just well, I didn't really want to go off on that tangent, but it was interesting, Larry. The mascot, our beloved mascot of Piqua High School, the Piqua Indian. And a side note is there was a fellow that I attended high school with, well, all the way through school and high school, and he played in the high school marching band, and it turns out that in tracing his ancestry, he is supposed to be Native American. He's a white fellow, and he became a chief of the Saponi tribe through his Native American ancestry. But he's a white guy all his life until this DNA stuff comes up, and then his paper trail and his DNA meshes, and now he comes up as a Saponi chief. But that's neither here nor there.
Okay. Well, I wanted to, at least explore the possibility of how a connection to the Johnston farm could be developed, because we know that the Friends of the Farm are very much associated with the development of an Indian museum.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, we can make associations or connectivity in promoting this inclusive heritage with Native American population and tying Indians and blacks together in the historical thread, if you will, within the Upper Miami Valley as well. And so there's perhaps no reason why there couldn't be an exploration of promoting and developing a connectivity, an association, a tie in regards to this inclusive heritage theme. That ought to be very welcome and embraced by the Pickle community because of our past promotion of the Heritage Festival and so much about the rich legacy of ancestry and heritage in the Upper Miami Valley. So I just wanted to create an opportunity for people to have a little different perspective in terms of how we go about that kind of an outreach, that kind of promotion of an inclusive heritage, and creating an opportunity, particularly on the part of blacks, to value and more esteem their family history narrative, and to not only embrace their stories, but to begin the work of telling those stories, because others can and or won't tell those stories in the same manner that those who are the descendants of the largest group of, I think that they're one of the largest group of manumitted slaves in the history of the United States of America.
Either the second and third in terms of numbers. You know, you hear about the King Carter,
Right.
and you hear about the Gist, or Gist, however you pronounce it, and their numbers are just a little, maybe just a little above the documented 380 plus names on the Freedom Register out of Charlotte County, Virginia, that's inclusive of the Randolph freedmen. So we know that there's between 375 and 400. And this is in 1846. Now, how many would there have been in 1833 who were freed? Because these numbers are, it's amazing.
Could you enlighten also, you know, since we kind of went back into that a little bit, could you enlighten people about the receptivity on the part of Ohio to these newly freed people coming into the state? And you made mention of freedom papers, and it dawned on me that as a member of the African American genealogy group of the Miami Valley, that we had visited Wright State University, and that Wright State University houses an archive, and that there's a listing of people entering the state of Ohio in the Upper Miami Valley. And of course, the Randolph freedmen are prominent, perhaps even the largest group of those who are actually documented in terms. Could you tell us a little bit about that process or procedure in terms of how that document trail comes about?
Okay, well, as I understand it, when Ohio became a state in 1803, formed out of the the Northwest Territory.
Mhm.
And Ohio was the first state coming out of that Northwest Ordinance in 1803.
Okay.
Well, Ohio had only been a state 1 year prior to the passage of the Ohio's Black Code in 1804, which the state government said that any person of color coming into Ohio had to register that they were in fact a free person of color and not a runaway or a fugitive slave. And how they proved that fact was supposedly through the issuances of manumission or emancipation papers from their former slave owner, which freed them and allowed them to come into the state of Ohio. They had to have been enslaved somewhere, or maybe they had been free persons of color in that state for some extended period of time. But they had to have something documenting that they were in fact not fugitive slaves. And then Ohio established a registry by county which these persons of color had to register with that county that they were in fact free and produce papers stating such. Now, the one piece of documentation that I have on my family is a third great grandfather, Lewis Adams, was freed from Shelby County, Kentucky in 1813, and his freedom papers are on file in Shelby County, Kentucky. Well, when he arrived in Ohio, he produced for the Champaign County Court a copy of his emancipation papers, which then registered him as a free person of color, and they referenced where he come from and who his former slave owner was. This was supposed to have been the rule for black people coming into Ohio as early as 1804, the establishment of these freedom registers. Is that what you're?
Absolutely.
That's where you're coming from?
Absolutely, yeah.
And there was supposed to have been some bond or some amount of money that went along with the filing of these papers. But I have never seen a financial document stating that they actually possessed it.
But that was basically to assure the fact that they wouldn't be charges
of the counties
of
of the state
in terms of
right
welfare.
right and to show you an example of this that goes back to the kinds of people that were included in the Randolph group was a gentleman who settled in Xenia or Greene County by the name of Godfrey Brown. Godfrey Brown was a shoemaker, a cobbler, who had been freed in Virginia, and he came to Greene County, Ohio in 1822. By 1830, Godfrey Brown owned 1,500 acres of land in Greene, Shelby, and Van Wert counties. Now, he certainly wasn't going to be a ward of the state. Through his skill as a craftsman, as a cobbler, as a shoemaker, he was able to amass enough money to purchase land in 3 counties by 1830. So this kind of flies in the face of these folks not having any skills coming into the state.
Actually, the policies, the behavior of the, European settlers to the area almost precipitates the promotion of a dependency. Because again, the Randolph freedmen had acreage in the amount of at least 2,000 acres. They would have had the opportunity to farm their own, little, farm and enough acreage to be able to, plant crops and take care of themselves, and maybe even to, sell to local markets as well. But that kind of independence was undermined by their fellow brethren who determined that they solely and exclusively warranted the opportunity to make a go of it in America, as opposed to these people who were newly freed coming from Virginia.
Does the community in Pickle, I know that they have a Goodrich Giles Park on the southern edge of Pickle.
Right.
But do they acknowledge that, does that park acknowledge that Goodrich Giles came out of the Randolph Freedman group?
It does.
Okay.
It does. But with that reference, what is key is not only the community as a whole acknowledging or embracing that kind of information, but I would like to target the question to the African American community itself. And I wonder if and or why there isn't a greater degree of supportive information or effort made to preserve this historical, material in association with the Randolph freedmen. I wonder if there couldn't be and shouldn't be a effort specifically on the part of the descendants to, for example, preserve the cemetery.
Jackson Cemetery?
The African Jackson Cemetery in Rossville. There's no reason, and I know that there is at least a plotting of the cemetery that lists approximately 125 names, and yet there's only maybe 8 or 10 or 12 names actually visible on a stone, within the cemetery. So there's no reason why the descendants shouldn't have some regard for their ancestors as to want to preserve that cemetery in a more meaningful manner. But perhaps that's symptomatic of the lack of identity that blacks have had in terms of esteeming themselves in a manner that is is consistent with other populations and their desire to promote their family history narrative and story.
Mhm. You know, going back to my early recollections of growing up in Pickle, and I'm ashamed. I'm also ashamed to admit that growing up in Pickle, I never saw a person of real community influence in Pickwa, in the larger context of Pickwa. Now I'm not talking about the black community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about the whole entire community of Pickwa.
Mm-hmm.
Never saw a black teacher. Never saw a black clerk in a store in Pickwa. Bank teller. No policeman. No fireman. And I mentioned teacher. But I never saw a person of color in any position of authority. The 18 years that I spent growing up in Pickle, from 1934 into 1952. And if it was a hard realization or recognition that if you wanted to use the fine education that you got coming through the Pickle school system, which was excellent, and you were well prepared to go on and eventually become somebody, you had to leave Pickle to do it.
Yeah.
You weren't going to get a teaching position. You weren't going to be hired in a downtown business venture where you would be, you know, out in front. You weren't going to be a salesman. You weren't even going to get a position of authority in any of the manufacturing positions in Pickwa. I can recall in the summer of 1952, after graduating from high school, we were looking for summer employment because a lot of the guys that I played ball with and such, we were going to go to college that fall. So we were looking for summer employment, and we went to the manufacturing concerns there in Pickwa for summer employment. And the guys that I grew up with and played ball with and went to school with got application forms for summer employment, and I was blank told we don't have any more janitorial positions, so we don't have an application for you to fill out, which told me quickly that I'm gonna have to get out of Dodge if I want to do anything. But that's I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on that.
Well, you know, and that's important. Your life spans, you know, your growth and development in Pickwa from the 1930s through the 1940s into the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many people who wouldn't even acknowledge, you know, that would have been the case in Pickwa, you know, then. Because as they look back, they have a different, even myopic kind of, perspective in terms of how it was to grow up. And in their minds, it was a very inclusive kind of community. But the reality, as being, heard from people like you who grew up there, I didn't come to Pickle until 1971, so I can't, say
can't really, yeah.
one way or the other how it was, but I can, of course, talk to people who were born and did in fact grow up during that previous period of time that you're remarking about. But to be balanced, I do know that, of course, in the 70s, perhaps as a result of some level of agitation on a national basis even, and some perhaps even, I know, also on a local basis, that inroads were made, and that there were some improvements in opportunities for blacks in Pickwa. I know, that black officers were hired. I know that black teachers were hired in the 70s. I was among them. But here again, it's sometimes it's important to recognize that people like yourself, who were well equipped, well educated, and motivated, didn't feel as if there was going to be a real opportunity for mobility and advancement if they remained, which is tragic. But that was a very real perception, at least from your perspective.
The only difference I can recall during the mid-50s, and I was in Montgomery, Alabama during the bus boycott in 1956. The only difference between Montgomery, Alabama and Pickwa, Ohio in 1956, when it came to shopping and eating establishments and what have you, in the downtown areas, was Pickwa didn't have signs colored in white like they had in in Montgomery. But in Pickwa, you knew that you weren't going to go into the bus station, right there where the library is now, that area, and you weren't going to eat at that counter in that bus station. You knew that if you went to either of the theaters in Pickwa, that you were going, if you went to what they called the Little Theater, which was on Wayne Street, that you were going to enter and immediately go up to the balcony. If you were going to sit and watch the movie, didn't have a sign white and colored, but you knew that's where you were going to go. If you went to what they called the Big Show, which is right cat-a-corner down from where the old library was, you knew that you were going to enter and sit back in this right corner. Summer at the Hollow. They just didn't have the signs. White colored or no colored allowed or whatever.
But the whole idea now is to have people aware of the disparity and acknowledge at least the historical perspectives, and to recognize that in spite of some of these, perspectives, that Pickle perhaps is distinct distinctively unique
Mm-hmm.
in perhaps its ability to move forward
Mm-hmm.
with an acknowledgement or recognition of what had taken place in the past, and also to fashion. Again, I'm coming back with this, this vision, a personal vision for Piqua, to fashion this inclusive heritage
Mm-hmm.
uh, in the way of moving forward and demonstrating our ability to distinguish ourselves in a manner that makes us unique.
Mm-hmm.
That, as the Randolph Friedman would have at least been able to differentiate between the people of Mercer County and the people of Piqua, who at least were tolerant
Mm-hmm.
enough to allow them to settle
Mm-hmm.
in Rossville
Mm-hmm.
across the
Mm-hmm.
Miami River,
Mm-hmm.
and reference them as being a more hospitable people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some degree of relativity and balance that we need to kind of associate with the historical record,
Mm-hmm.
as it were, and as we make an effort to move forward as a community on a collective basis. So I want to be about that. I have some, ideas in terms of how to do that. Some of those ideas have to begin within the African American community themselves, in terms of, again, recognizing who they are,
Who they are.
embracing who they are, and if that becomes a difficult task, what should be more easily able to improve the image and identity of people of color is the fact that whose they are.
Mm-hmm.
We all ought to be able to recognize that we are creatures made from the Creator, and as such, we according to Scripture, were made in His image, and there wasn't any special endowment given to some at the disadvantage of others.
Mm-hmm.
So, knowing that, we ought to all kind of recognize our commonality,
Mm-hmm.
and recognize who we are and whose we are, as we perhaps something I want to share with you that you may or may not be aware of. I think we're coming up on the 40th anniversary of Alex Haley's sharing of roots.
Yeah, 1976.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And again, for me, it stems back to the fact that I was a teacher
Mm-hmm.
at Piqua High School, teaching Black history. Again, a lot of
Which
Piquoites don't
never-
know.
Never ceases to amaze me.
A lot of Piquoites don't know that for 30 consecutive years, this person was given the privilege and opportunity of teaching a Black history course at Piqua High School.
That never ceases to amaze me.
From 1971 to 2001. Now, I don't have any doubt that a part of that opportunity came as a result of some degree of demand and agitation. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
Okay.
But again, it attests to a level of tolerance and acceptance
Yeah.
on the part of the community of Piqua
Yep.
to allow for the teaching of a Black history course for 30 consecutive
Exactly.
years.
Exactly.
So, knowing that, again, it's a part of my, I think, obligation, responsibility.
Those kids who came up in Piqua in high school level in the 70s and beyond, during the period that you were there, they don't know how fortunate they were to have you and your course being taught there in their high school. That's to me that's big.
Yeah.
That's major.
And we're trying to, you know, remedy the situation in terms of making sure that there is a presence of diversity within West Central Ohio. We have, of course, and I was sharing with you today, the PROD program booklet, which you have well, you've been a supporter since day one.
Since day one.
And have always, you know, supported me and the PROD board in any capacity. You've been frequent in a number of the PROD banquets, and have also shared that support in the way of financial support as well. But it's not, and by the way, our PROD theme this year was Dreamers Unite a Community to Build the Future. Dreamers unite a community to build the future.
And you're a dreamer, Larry.
Oh, I'm a dreamer.
Yeah,
No doubt about that. But here's what I can envision is some kind of building of monuments, either in Rossville at the African Jackson Cemetery, particularly to identify the graves of the Randolph ancestors in that place. Perhaps also a larger kind of monument that might be visible along 25A, and that would be accessible, particularly for those utilizing the bike path and walking, or from the Johnston, you know, complex as well into East Piqua, for example. But not only that, but to formulate a larger scale monument. And again, I think of, you know, Alex Haley in terms of the movie Roots and the particular movement. And Art, in closing, I just want to say thank you for welcoming me into your home here in Springfield. And not only you, but your lovely wife, Anita, who's always been gracious in allowing me to come and spend time talking to you and taking time away from her. But it's important that we make the time to serve the community by way of sharing and entering into conversation and dialogue about the past, so that we have an opportunity to move forward into the future.
Well, it's always a pleasure.
I thank you.
Because you bring your classroom into my home, man. I learn something every time you come here. I really do.
And I appreciate that, but as my mentor, I learn more. I learn more.
Yeah.
And so, and particularly in association with the technological background and the genealogical records and so forth that you always share. We're talking about getting me up to date on Spoke today, and that's been a real blessing. So I just thank you for your leadership, and I thank you for your personal willingness to bring me along in terms of your sharing of knowledge in regards to genealogy and family history research.
My pleasure, Brother Hamill.
Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.